Hello, everyone. My name is El-Harasis. I'm a clinical cardiac electrophysiology fellow at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. I'm here to talk a little bit about personal statements and my experience with them. I have written a personal statement for medical school, but then for internal medicine residency, cardiology fellowship, and EP fellowship. I've also worked on the cardiology selection committee for our cardiology fellowship and have reviewed a lot of personal statements, and throughout the years have done a lot of editing and proofreading for personal statements as well. So this is kind of a culmination of my experience with personal statements. So the first thing that I want to say is that with personal statements in general, everybody has an opinion. And, it's always important to get a little bit of input on your personal statement, to have people review your personal statement. But ultimately, when you end up sending it to a lot of people, then everybody is going to chip away and change something in the personal statement. And it at some point will no longer be your personal statement. And just remember that there are some things that are important to include and things that are probably not worth including. But in terms of the little nuances, just remember that everybody will have an opinion, and you just have to take whatever everyone's opinion is with a grain of salt. So, in terms of guidelines, ERAS will actually allow you to submit a personal statement up to 5 pages. But in general, the overall length of the personal statement should be about 1 page, single space, regular size, so size 11 or 12 font in Word. That will probably amount to about 500 to 700 words. In general, if it's less than 3/4 of a page, it's probably too short. And it's okay for it to be a few lines over a page. But in general, and this is advice that was given from my program director during residency at Mayo, was that your personal statement should really be about 1 page, single-spaced, regular size font in Word, which is kind of like the default size 11 or size 12 font. Anything longer than that, it just really becomes too cumbersome to read. Um, there are important things that you have to include on your personal statement. These include why you want to pursue your specialty, what are your career goals. So basically, and we'll elaborate a little bit on every one of these things, what things make you unique as an individual. Everybody's gone to medical school, everybody's done their USMLE exams, but there are certain things, whether it's teaching or research or volunteer work, that makes you unique. These are things that you want to highlight. Any circumstances that you want to elaborate on. These may not apply to everybody, but if you've had a particular hardship that, say, for example, led you to failing an exam or having to redo a year in medical school or something like that, that is a circumstance that you want to elaborate on. And then it's important to also include a sentence or two for IMGs about why you want to train in the US and not remain in your home country. So first things first, why do you want to do your specialty? This is really, really important. And if I'm reading a personal statement and if I like scroll down more than halfway through a personal statement and I still don't know why this person wants to pursue a particular specialty, or even worse, what specialty this person even wants to pursue, then that's, something that gives me a little bit of a red flag. And so for this, you want to really sit down with yourself and think about what elements of the specialty appeal to you most. And was there a particular moment or a case that solidified this to you? And you want to try to link this to personal experiences, whether it's experiences on hospital rotations where you really fell in love with a specialty through the patients that you took care of, or you felt very academically interested in the specialty. You just find the subject material very interesting. Or if it's for some people, it's like a more personal reason, like a personal or family member illness. So you just really want to highlight what elements of the specialty really appeal to you most. And I want to caution you to really try to be as specific as possible. There are a lot of times where I read personal statements where they say things like, I want to do internal medicine because it has a mix of inpatient and outpatient medicine. Well, I mean, you can say that about a surgical subspecialty or obstetrics and gynecology or pediatrics. If you say something like, I want to do internal medicine because of the wide variety of patient cases that I could potentially take care of, again, that can apply to multiple different specialties, both medical and surgical. And so you really want to be as specific as possible when you highlight why you want to do your specialty. The next thing that you really want to highlight and what the people want to see is what are your career goals? Where do you see yourself? So, for example, if you are doing an internal medicine residency in 5 to 10 years, do you see yourself pursuing a fellowship? And if so, in what fellowship? Do you see yourself working in, say, an academic medical center or in like a rural primary care clinic? And it's always better to define an interest, even if you're not 100% decided. What I mean by that is like, let's say that you're 70% thinking that you want to do endocrinology, 30% thinking primary care, you know, it's fine to say that if it makes sense with your overall experiences, like let's say you've done endocrinology research and you're kind of interested in endocrinology, it's always good to say that you kind of define an interest, even if you mention in the personal statement that you're still exploring options and you're keeping an open mind. But overall, based on what you've experienced so far, you see yourself really interested in endocrinology. That's something that's always worth saying because as program directors have told me, if you have candidate A and candidate B, one person has a better sense of what they want to do with their life. The other person is kind of really all over the place. They probably will favor candidate A, even if it's subconsciously. So always a good idea to try to define an interest, even if you're not 100% decided. The next things that you want to talk about are what things make you unique. As I mentioned, everybody's gone to medical school. Everybody has, done certain experiences like the USMLEs, et cetera. But are there certain things that really make you different from everybody else? And don't assume that like if you go to from people from a certain country may say, oh, well, everybody does this volunteer experience. That's probably not the case for people in the United States. So don't discount certain things that you've done whether it's teaching experience, research experience, volunteer work or community service, or even just living and studying abroad. A lot of people will highlight that having studied medicine abroad means that they worked in an environment that had limited resources, where they had to see a lot of patients. Highlight and talk about in your intern year, how many patients were you taking care of, what that taught you about prioritization and time management and being a person who is very resourceful. People will sometimes talk about how it makes you really hone in on the physical exam because you don't necessarily have all the resources like imaging stuff that are readily at your disposal. Don't assume that people automatically know what your internship experience was like, because these experiences will vary broadly and widely from country to country and even from location to location. So highlight things, whether it's teaching, research, volunteer work, how that links into your specialty and how that makes you unique as an individual. Um, some do's and don'ts about the personal statement. Get it proofread by 1 to 2 additional people. Ideally, it's nice to say that you have one person who is of a medical background because they will understand what is to be included in a personal statement. Always kind of a nice idea if this person is available to you, if you have somebody who's like good at English, who is from a non-medical background, just to read it, kind of proofreading for spelling, grammar, and just general flow, I think is always a good idea. But just remember that the more people you have read your personal statement, the more input you're going to have and the less personal it becomes because everybody's going to have an opinion. And so you want to try to limit it to people that you really trust, a few people, and take everybody's opinion with a grain of salt. Try to make your introduction catchy and make the reader want to continue reading. And so, starting with a story, patient case, things like that, they always make that introduction catchy. You don't always have to do this, but if you can, I find that it makes a reader want to continue reading. And if you write about something in your personal statement, just know that it is fair game in an interview for an interviewer to ask you about. So if you are making up, a huge chunk of a case that you're including in your personal statement, or if you're talking a lot about an experience that, you don't remember the details of, just be prepared that anything that you write in your personal statement is going to be fair game in an interview. And a lot of times interviewers will scan through your personal statement and will use your personal statement as a starting point to start the conversation and to ask you questions about yourself. As I mentioned, be specific. So don't say that I like internal medicine just because of vague reasons. Try to be as specific as possible as to what you did in your experiences that make you unique, but also why you love the specialty. So an example of being specific, a sentence that I've seen in, some people write is, I enjoy doing teaching and look forward to developing my teaching skills during residency. A better way to say this would be working as an anatomy teaching assistant weekly for an entire year during medical school was an incredible opportunity as it allowed me to hone my teaching skills by developing innovative ways to explain challenging concepts to other students. That is something that really highlights how much time, effort you put into something, how frequently you were working at something, what you learned from it, and what you did, as opposed to just vaguely saying, I enjoy doing teaching or I enjoy doing research. Another example, I'm interested in internal medicine because of the diversity of pathologies, ability to work in both inpatient and outpatient settings, and the intellectual challenges. Again, that can apply to any specialty, including surgical specialties. So, because in a lot of specialties, you will also work inpatient and outpatient, and you will have a wide diversity of pathologies. And so a more specific way is to say, my internal medicine rotation captivated my interest in the field. I love the diagnostic challenges of working up patients who come into the hospital with undifferentiated symptoms and maintaining a breadth of knowledge across different subspecialties of internal medicine. I particularly recall the case of a young patient with X, and then you talk about that patient. And then, as I was mentioning, you would talk about the young patient or whoever it is that that really kind of triggered your love for internal medicine. As I mentioned, don't have an absolute ton of people proofread and edit your personal statement because at the end of the day, it's your personal statement, and the more people who edit it, it becomes less personal. This is a personal opinion based on, again, advice from my internal medicine program director. Just avoid quotes at the beginning of the personal statement or anywhere in the personal statement. There are some times where you can find a really great quote that will really tie into what you're trying to say, but a lot of times it ends up being very cliche and cringy. And so I would just say avoid quotes and jokes because you never know. It's okay to have a little bit of kind of a humorous undertone to like a certain part of the personal statement. But, just having an overt joke in there, I've seen it before. It just doesn't come across well, and you never know what's too much for some people who are reading it. As well, avoid all references to politics and religion, no matter how strongly you feel about a certain issue. Um, Avoid cliches, avoid copying and pasting from online templates just because, they run these through plagiarism checks and, we take in the US, they take plagiarism very, very seriously as well. And so you just want to really be sure not to just directly copy and paste from somebody else or from an online resource. And I would also say because they already know that you've gone through medical school and you went to medical school, don't spend a lot of space explaining why you want to be a doctor because there are some people who spent a lot of time writing their medical school personal statement and they have this beautifully crafted statement on why they want to be a doctor and what inspires them about medicine. But that ends up wasting a lot of space, and it's not really relevant to a residency personal statement because people know that you already are in medical school and you're already either going to soon be a doctor or are a doctor. So don't spend a lot of space explaining why you want to be a doctor. I've also seen some people who write at the bottom, thank you for your consideration. That's really not necessary. And so just you don't really need to include that. So a sample outline, for example, this is how I approached my personal statement would be paragraph one, why you want to do your specialty. I talked about why I love internal medicine. I talked about an interesting case during the elective that I did that really captivated my love for internal medicine. Second paragraph would be what about my career goals? I talked about why I love cardiology and experiences that I had done, like research experiences and clinical experiences that led me to realize that I loved cardiology. The third paragraph would be what things make me unique. So I talked about research and teaching experience and going to medical school outside the US and how that made me a unique individual. An optional paragraph to then include would be any circumstances that you want to elaborate on. And then the fourth paragraph would be why you want to come to the US for IMGs, what type of program you're looking for, and a short concluding statement. Think of it as you're telling your personal story, so make sure that the experience you talk about support your earlier paragraphs and career goals. So for example, if have random disjointed things that you've done, try to think about what experiences that you've done or try to find a common link between the different experiences that you've done to try to make it a seamless personal story. And that is easier said than done, but that's why it takes a little bit of reflection before you go ahead and write the personal statement. And just realize that it is a little bit of an iterative process in that, usually the personal statement will take several drafts in order to get to the point where you are ready. So definitely give yourself enough time when you're writing and drafting your personal statement. Something that comes up regarding tailored personal statement, you need at least one personal statement, but you can have as many as you like. There are people who have different personal statements for specific programs. For example, if there is a program that is clearly your number one program due to personal reasons or family reasons, some people have written a personal statement specifically for that program. There are some people who really want to be in New York City and they write a personal statement for New York City programs where they talk about how they love New York City and the opportunities there, or family personal reasons that lead them to want to be in New York City. And then the other times that people have different personal statements are if you are applying to academic versus community hospitals. Say if you've done a ton of research, there are some people who may want to highlight that extensively in a personal statement for an academic medical program, but maybe tone that down a little bit when they're submitting a personal statement for a community hospital. There's no recommendation to say that you need to have X number of personal statements. Most people end up just having one or two personal statements, which is basically one personal statement and maybe a variation of a paragraph in the personal statement. But in general, just be careful that you have to assign the personal statement to the programs that you're applying to and be very, very careful that there are some people who have accidentally submitted the wrong personal statement to the program that they were not intending to. So just make sure that you double and triple check which personal statement you're assigning to which program. And I always would say that if you're in a situation where you're applying for different specialties, like say you're applying for internal medicine and peds or internal medicine and family medicine, definitely have separate personal statements for the different specialties. Just because I think it comes across really poorly or kind of a little bit lazy if you have an internal medicine personal statement and you mention multiple times that you want to do internal medicine and then you submit it to a pediatrics program or to a family medicine program. People have done it, so just try to have separate personal statements for different specialties. At this point, I'll pause and I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you for your attention.